morning, children. It's such a joy for Ms. Wayega and for myself to visit you in your homes today.
Kuyintokozo enkulu bantwana siyanibingelela futhi ekuseni kuyintokozo enkulu ukuthi singahlangana nawe nomem sindawonye sinivakashele emakhaya.
Ms. Wayega is a special friend to me.
Umem umngane omkhulu kimina.
I taught her one day and now we both serve the Lord together.
Bangani umem wayewuthisha wami ngolinye usuku kodwa manje sesikhonza uNkulunkulu sindawonye.
Now children, I'm sure you've often heard or read about famous Christian people all over the world.
Bantwana ngiyathemba ukuthi nake nafunda ngabantu abaphathe ivangeli ama-missionary ababephila ngesikhathi edlule.
You know, I love reading about them
Ngiyathanda kakhulu ukufunda ngabo
because I want to learn their secrets, how and why they serve the Lord.
ngoba ngiyafisa ukufunda impilo zabo imfihlo yabo ukuthi kungani babekhonza uNkulunkulu.
And I want to see what they were like when they were young.
Futhi ngithanda ukwazi ukuthi babenjani bese bancane.
Young like you all are.
Njengoba babebancane njengathi bakani.
And today, there's a very special person I want to tell you about.
Kodwa namhlanje khona umuntu ospecially kakhulu engifuna ukuthi sikhulume ngaye.
Here's a painting of him. His name is Charles Spurgeon.
Nasi isithombe sakhe igama lakhe uCharles Spurgeon.
Now, Charles Spurgeon was born nearly 200 years ago
uCharles Spurgeon lo wazala eminyakeni ewu-200 edlule
in 1834.
ngo-1834.
And he was one of 17 children in that family.
Futhi yena ekhaya kwakhe babewu-17 abantwana.
Can you imagine how much fun they must have had? They didn't need to call all their neighbors to come and play soccer or whatever. They just played with one another.
Angicabange bangani babenobumnandi obungakanani ngoba phela babengadingi ukuthi beke amakhelwane boqoqa abangani babo ngoba bebehlala bendawonye.
It must have been a wonderful family to grow up in.
Futhi ngiyathemba ukuthi kwakuyisikhathi esimnandi ukuthi bekhule kuloyo mndeni.
So I've read up a little bit about him and I want to tell you a few things that he experienced when he was young, even your age.
Futhi ngifundile ngaye ngifuna ukunitshela izinto wahlangabezana nazo esemncane mhlawumbe semngangawe nje mntwana.
You know what? He loved reading.
Bantwana niyazi ukuthini wayethanda ukufunda.
And by the time he was 6 years old, he had already read Pilgrim's Progress.
Ngenkathi eseneminyaka nje eyisithupha wayesefunde uhambo lomhambi.
And over the years, he read it over 100 times.
Futhi eminyakeni ewu-100 eminyakeni edlule wayesefunde uhambo lomhambo ka-100.
Now, he spent many years with his grandparents.
Wakhula kakhulu nogogo wakhe nomkhulu wakhe.
Now, they had a library, a place where they kept all their books, and it was a dark room, it had no windows.
Futhi khona babene-library lapho bebeka khona iy'ncwadi zabo yayinganawo amawindi futhi imnyama.
In those days, every house had to pay tax for every window they had. So people would have as few windows as possible.
Ngoba phela abantwana ngaleso sikhathi abantu babedinga ukuthi bekhokhe ukuthi bebe newindi ethile futhi yingakho abantu babenganawo amawindi amaningi.
Now he'd go in there and his grandfather had great big heavy books which he'd carry out and he'd read.
Futhi ngaleso sikhathi wayehamba uCharles Spurgeon eyothatha iy'ncwadi umkhulu wakhe phela wayeney'ncwadi ey'nkulu wayeyithatha izincwadi ayoyifunda uCharles Spurgeon.
This was something he loved doing.
Ngoba phela lento wayeyithanda kakhulu ukuyenza.
But then one day a friend lent him a book.
Ngolunye usuku umngani wakhe wamboleka incwadi.
And when his parents found out about it, they punished him.
Ngalesikhathi abazali bakhe beyibona le ncwadi wathola uswazi.
Because they said it wasn't a good book.
Ngoba abazali bathi akusincwadi elungile le.
And you know what Spurgeon said to his sister afterwards?
Uyazi uSpurgeon wathini kusisi wakhe ngaleso sikhathi?
Mum and Dad were right to punish me.
Ubaba nomama kwakuyinto elungile ukuthi bengiphe uswazi.
Because I'd really wish that I could forget what I read in that book.
Ngoba ngiyafisa ukuthi ngikhohle ngakufunda kuleyo ncwadi.
But I can't. It sticks like glue.
Ngoba angikwazi ukukhohlwa inamathele lento.
Bad things and bad books are terrible.
Izinto ezimbi nezincwadi ezimbi zimbi kakhulu.
Do you hear what Spurgeon said? He read one book and he said those things stick. I can't get rid. I want to forget them, but they're there.
Ngoba namuzu Spurgeon uthini? Wafunda incwadi eyodwa. Uyazizama ukukhohlwa ngazo kodwa lezi zinto lezi zinamathele.
That's why your parents often guide you as to what to read and what not to read.
Ingakho abazali behle bekusiza ukuthi fanele ufundeni futhi ungafundini.
Because they know that the bad sticks like glue and you can't get rid of it.
Ngoba bayazi ukuthi izinto ezimbi ziyanamathela ungakwazi ukuyisusa engqondweni.
And then, even before he was 6 years old, this happened.
Futhi ngaphambi ukuthi ebe neminyaka eyisithupha lokhu kwenzeka.
His grandfather was a minister and his father was a minister.
Umkhulu wakhe wayengumshumayeli nobaba wakhe wayengumshumayeli.
Now, in his grandfather's congregation, there was a man named Rhodes.
Enkonzweni kamkhulu wakhe wawukhona indoda ebizwa ngoRhodes.
And his life made his grandfather very sad.
Impilo yale ndoda yayenza umkhulu kaCharles engaphatheki kahle.
Because he went to church, but then he also went to the pub where he drank and he smoked and he mixed with some bad people.
Ngoba phela le ndoda lele yayifika esontweni izenkonzweni izosonta masiphuma njalo iyahamba iyophuza iyahamba iyobhema nabantu ababi.
Now Spurgeon, he was 5 years old and he realized this man's making my grandfather sad.
uSpurgeon lo wayeneminyaka yo5 nje kuphela kodwa wayibona ukuthi lento le yenziwa le ndoda iyenza umkhulu wakhe engaphatheki kahle.
And so one day he came to his grandfather and he said to his grandfather, "Grandfather, I'll kill old Rhodes. I'll kill him."
Hayi ke uSpurgeon wafika kumkhulu wakhe wathi mkhulu ngizombulala uRhodes ngizombulala.
And his grandfather said, "Spurgeon, you can't do anything bad. The police will arrest you."
Umkhulu wakhe wathi hayibo Spurgeon awukwazi ukwenza into embi amaphoyisa azokubopha.
"No, grandfather, I will kill old Rhodes," he answered.
Hayi uSpurgeon wathi mkhulu ngizombulala uRhodes lomdala.
And not long afterwards, he came back from being outside.
Futhi ngaleso sikhathi nje esincane sekudlulile wabuya uSpurgeon.
And he said to his grandfather, "Grandfather, I've killed old Rhodes."
Hayi ke wafika uSpurgeon waya kumkhulu wakhe wathi mkhulu ngimbulalele uRhodes.
And he'll never ever give you a day of trouble.
Futhi ngeke aphinde akuphathe kabi.
And his grandfather was very concerned and he said to Spurgeon, "Spurgeon, what have you done?"
Umkhulu wakhe ethukile wabuza uSpurgeon, "Spurgeon wenzeni?"
And Spurgeon said, "Grandfather, nothing wrong, nothing. I've been about the Lord's business. I've been working for the Lord."
Hayi ke uSpurgeon wasethi mkhulu hayi into embi nje kade ngenza umsebenzi wenkosi.
And that was it. He kept quiet after that.
Futhi lokho nje ukuphela impendulo yakhe wakuthula umsindo.
After a few hours, there was a knock at the door.
Hayi ke sekudlula ama-hour ambalwa kwaba khona onqonqozayo emnyango.
And who was on the doorstep but this elderly man, old Rhodes?
Hayi ke ubani wasemnyango kwakuyile ndoda endala uRhodes.
Grandfather was happy to see that he was still alive.
Hayi ke umkhulu wayejabula ukubona ukuthi le ndoda isaphila.
And this is the story that old Rhodes told his grandfather.
Yile ndaba kuRhodes waxoxela khona umkhulu kaSpurgeon.
He said, I was sitting in the pub having my pipe and my mug of beer when that child comes in.
Ngangihleli lapha ematshwaleni ngiphuzela ngibhemela lapho lengane le ifika.
To think an old man like me gets reproved by a little boy like that.
Ukuthi mina indoda endala kangaka ngithethiswe ingane encane kanje.
And this child says to me, and he points his finger at me,
Wathi lengane encane yathi kumina ingikhomba ngomunwe.
"What are you doing here, Elijah, in the pub?"
Wayesethi lesi silengane wenzani la ematshwaleni Elijah?
You are a member of the church and you are breaking your pastor's heart.
Wena uyingxenye yebandla uphula inhliziyo kamfundisi wakho.
I am ashamed of you.
Ngiphoxekile ngawe.
And then he walked away.
Lo mntwana lo wahamba.
Old Rhodes says, I was very angry.
Uthi uRose lo ngangicasuke kabi.
But in my heart, I knew it was all true.
Kodwa enhlizweni ngangazi ukuthi kuyiqiniso.
And I was guilty.
Futhi nganginecala.
So he says, I put down my pipe, I put down my mug of beer, and I went outside to a lonely spot.
Uthi ngabeka phansi ubhiya wami nalokho ngangibhema ngahamba ngayohlala ngedwana.
And I cast myself before the Lord, and I confessed my sin, and I begged the Lord for forgiveness.
Ngayilahla phambi kaNkulunkulu, ngazivuma isono sami, ngamcela uNkulunkulu ukuthi angixolele.
And I know that the Lord has had mercy on me.
Futhi ngiyazi ukuthi uNkulunkulu inkosi ibile nomusa kimina.
And now, my dear pastor, I've come to ask you for your forgiveness.
Namshumayeli wami ngiyaza kuwe manje ngiyacela ukuthi ungixolele.
And I'll never make you sad again.
Ngeke ngiphinde ngikuphathe kabi.
Spurgeon, remember, was 5 years old when that happened.
Khumbula ukuthi uSpurgeon wayeneminyaka u5 nje lokhu kwenzeka.
Now, children, you'd think with all this, grandfather a minister, pastor, father a pastor, that Spurgeon would have known that he's a Christian.
Bangani ngalokho nje ukuthi umkhulu wakhe uSpurgeon nobaba wakhe bangabashumayeli uSpurgeon wayezokwazi ukuthi uMkristu yena.
But you know what? Spurgeon was often very, very miserable.
Kodwa niyazi bangani uSpurgeon kwesinye isikhathi wayeumuntu ongamuhlanga obuncu nje.
And some days he felt as though he's living under a cloud of darkness.
Kwesinye isikhathi wayebona ngathi uphila phansi kwefu elimnyama.
And he felt miserable.
Wayeumuntu omuncu ongaphathekile kahle.
One Sunday morning, he was on his way to church.
Ngolunye usuku ngesonto ekseni wayebheke enkonzweni.
It was snowing. The snow was falling. It was cold.
Lalikhithika futhi kubanda kakhulu.
And he realized, I can't go any further. And he turned down a street and found a little church.
Futhi wabona ukuthi angikwazi ukuqhubeka wachela endleleni wathola ibandla elincane.
He was only 15 years old then.
Wayeneminyaka u15 nje kuphela.
And he got inside and there were about 12 to 15 people. That was all.
Futhi wangena enkonzweni lapho wabona ukuthi kwakhona abantu abawu12 noma abancane nje phakathi esontweni.
And they waited for the minister to arrive, but the minister probably couldn't come because of the snow.
Futhi belinde ukuthi mhlambe umshumayeli angene kodwa umshumayeli akafika ngenxa ukuthi lalikhithika.
And so one of the poor men there got up to the pulpit and started preaching.
Omunye wayemdala wasukuma waya epulpiti washumayela.
And he read a text from Isaiah chapter 45.
Wafunda ku-Isaiah chapter 45.
That says, "Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth."
Elisho ukuthi buka kumina usindiswe nina bonke bomhlaba.
Spurgeon later said the man didn't even pronounce the words correctly.
uSpurgeon wayesho ukuthi le ndoda ayikhulumanga ngisho kahle.
And this man said, You know what? This is a simple text. It says, look.
Indoda yasesho ukuthi licacile nje leli verse lithi nje buka.
Well, a man doesn't need to go to college to look.
Ngoba phela indoda ayidingi ukuthi ihambe iye ekolishi ukuzibuke.
Anyone can look. A child can look.
Ngoba wonke umuntu engabuka nje ngisho ingane encane ingabuka.
You can be the biggest fool, but you can look.
Ungaba isilima esidala kodwa ungabuka.
And then he said, and this text says, look unto me.
Futhi le ndaba iyasho ukuthi buka kimina.
He says, many of you here in this congregation are looking at yourselves. That's no use. There's no use in looking at yourselves.
Ngoba nina la enkonzweni niyibuka nina, akusizi ukuthi niyibuke nina.
You can't help yourself.
Anikwazi ukuyisiza.
Then he said, look unto me. I am sweating great drops of blood.
Bukani mina ngiconsa umjuluko wegazi.
I think you know who we're talking about when we say, look unto me.
Ngoba siyazi ukuthi sikhuluma ngobani masithi buka kimina.
Then the poor man said, look unto me. I am hanging on the cross.
Yasisi le ndoda le buka mina ngiyalenga esiphambanweni.
Look, I am dead and buried.
Futhi ngifile ngavuka.
Look at me. I will rise.
Buka kimina ngizovuka.
Look at me. I'm sitting at my Father's right hand.
Buka kimina ngihleli eceleni kwababa wami.
Oh, look to me. Look unto me.
Ngibuke kimina.
And then the minister looked at Spurgeon and he said, young man, you look very miserable.
Futhi le ndoda le yasiyabuka kuSpurgeon asithi ndoda ubukeka umuntu ungaphathekile kahle.
And you will continue looking very miserable in this life and in death unless you obey my text.
Futhi ayisisho le ndoda ukuthi uzoqhubeka ubuke kanje la emhlabeni nasekufeni ungalaleli leli verse.
Obey this text now and be saved.
Lalela izwi likaNkulunkulu usindiswe.
And then he shouted at Spurgeon, look unto me and live.
Le ndoda imemeza kuSpurgeon ithi buka kumina usindiswe.
Look unto Jesus Christ
Buka kuJesu Kristu
and be saved.
usindiswe.
Well, that was the turning point in Spurgeon's life.
Leyo kwakuyilapho uSpurgeon ephenduka khona.
He repented of his sins.
Waphenduka ezonweni zakhe.
They say when he got home, his face had changed. He was bright and cheerful.
Bathi khathi efika ekhaya ubuso bakhe babujabule kakhulu bukhanya.
And even his mother, you know, mothers can see everything. You try and hide things from your moms, but she saw immediately something wonderful's happened to my son.
Ngisho uma wakhe niyazi ukuthi mangani umama uyakwazi ukubona yonke into ungazama ukumfihlela uma kodwa uyabona. NakuSpurgeon wabona ukuthi khonto enzekile kwindodana yami.
And from that day on, he preached. At 16 years old, he preached his first sermon.
Kusukela lapho washumayela uSpurgeon esukela eneminyaka ewu16.
And by the time he was 20 years old, he had already preached 600 sermons.
Ngenkathi eseneminyaka ewu20 wayeseshumayele intshumayelo eziwu600.
Now, I've got many more stories, but I think maybe the time's running out.
Nginey'ndaba ey'ningi kodwa ngicabanga ukuthi isikhathi sesabile.
All about when he was young.
Konke lokhu kwenzeka esemncane.
He immediately started writing verses of the Bible on pieces of paper.
Waqala ebhala amavesi eBhayibheli emaphepheni nje amancane.
And he'd leave them all over the town where he lived so people could read them.
Washiya lapho bonke abantu abahlala khona ukuze abantu befunde.
And he went from home to home
Ehamba umuzi nomuzi.
sharing the gospel.
Batshena ngezwi likaNkulunkulu.
And later, as you'll see in the slide, they built a big church, the Metropolitan Tabernacle.
Futhi sekudlula iminyaka bakhanda ibandla isonto elikhulu.
He even preached in the Crystal Palace in London.
Futhi wayekwazi nokushumayela le eLondon kwiPalace.
And at this place, he managed to preach to over 23,000 people without a microphone.
Futhi ngaleso sikhathi wakwazi ukushumayela kubantu abawu-3,000 enganayo ngisho i-microphone.
What an amazing man.
Indoda eyisimanga le.
These things happened when he was young.
Konke lokhu kwenzeka esemusha.
Children, we love the Lord, don't we?
Bantwana siyamthanda uNkulunkulu akunjalo?
What are we doing for him?
Simenzelani?
What are we doing for others so that others can get to know him as well?
Sibenzelani abanye ukuze abantu bekwazi ukumazi naye uJesu?
Spurgeon challenges us.
uSpurgeon usishiyela inselelo.
This is a photo of when he was old, and they say by the time he died, he had preached to 10 million people.
Lesi sithombe ilapho esekhulile ngenkathi esedlula emhlabeni wayeseshumayela kubantu abawu-10 million.
I hope these stories have inspired you, children.
Ngiyathemba ukuthi lezi ndaba zinivusele ugqozi.
And you know what? I'm not going to pray now because you're going to pray.
Futhi-ke mina ngiyangithandaze manje ngoba wena uzothandaza.
Those of you who've listened to this, why don't you go to your room now and go on your knees and ask the Lord. Say, Lord Jesus, I'm young, but Spurgeon could work for you. Help me too.
Laba balalela indaba ungaye endlini yakho kulala uthandaza uNkosi ngimncane njengoba uSpurgeon wakusebenzela nami ngisiza ukuthi ngikusebenzele.
And Lord Jesus, teach me how to do it.
Nkosi uJesu ngifundise ukuthi ngingakwenza kanjani.
The Lord Jesus is the best teacher.
Inkosi uJesu uthisha omkhulu.
Thank you.
Thank you. Siyabonga kakhulu.